I've been saying for years that pelvic health physical therapy is the best kept secret in medicine. Like, why are we still having to advocate so much to providers to get this care? Because most providers don't know what to do with it. I think that it's just important for women to know that they can heal and have a more fulfilling sex life.
Welcome, Dr. Heather Jeffcoat. It's so wonderful to see you, and welcome everyone back to the Integrative Women's Health Podcast. Let's dive in and talk about pain with sex. Why, as a pelvic physical therapist, have you started to more and more over your career really think about this as an essential function of activities of daily living, if you will, from a PT perspective?
Yeah, first, thanks for having me on, Jessica. And also love that you said, let's just dive into talking about painful sex. That's amazing. That's the best intro ever. It's obviously forever been a very stigmatized condition in women, right? I mean, we've been seeing Super Bowl ads for erectile dysfunction for years, for over a decade. But when it comes to women that have sexual dysfunction, it's very stigmatized. And entering early on as a physical therapist, treating so many women, seeing how much it impacted not just their relationships, but their self-esteem, right? They're feeling like they were not a complete person without having their sexual function intact. So I think, it became, I took it upon me to be an advocate for them because these things can be changed. These things that I'm seeing are many times fixable, and many times beyond that, fixable with physical therapy. Like, why doesn't everybody know this? I've been saying for years that pelvic health physical therapy is the best kept secret in medicine. Like, why are we still having to advocate so much to providers to get this care? Because most providers don't know what to do with it. I think that it's just important for women to know that they can heal and have a more fulfilling sex life.
Yes. And so to circle back, most of our listeners are women struggling with their own challenges, like having painful sex themselves. But we also have quite a few, in fact, most of our community is women's health and wellness professionals of all disciplines, health coaches, physical therapists, nutritionists, gynecologists, and so forth. And so one of the things that's really interesting for me about your life and career is that, you started as a physical therapist, and I want to talk a little bit about talk about how your career has evolved, because sometimes it's so inspiring to others to just see how people get to where they are, where you're writing you're finishing and releasing the second edition of your book. You've had your own private practice for many years. What was your career evolution like?
Yeah. So right out of PT school, I actually was a sports med PT, and I loved it. I loved working with athletes of all levels, and it was fulfilling from a standpoint of like, people have these injuries and I can help them and I'm getting people better. And this is why I went to school. But very quickly out of PT school, I realized the setting of sports medicine was not matching with what I wanted to do with my patients. And, not all sports med settings are like this, but my first job, I sometimes would have 6 patients in an hour.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I didn't go to Duke University, spend all this money on my education to just not be able to provide care to anybody. Like, what care? If I have 6 people in an hour, what am I actually doing for them? If they have, chronic back pain, I don't know. So so that became really my eyes opening more to women's health, is what it was called at the time, because I'm more old school like that. So pelvic health now. I found a job about 4 months after I started that sports med job that was 50% ortho, 50% women's health. And so really started to gain my experience in the field through that second job I had after PT school, and moved. I was practicing in Raleigh, North Carolina, moved because of life circumstances back to Los Angeles. where I still live now, and just focused more and more on women's and pelvic health. And really, even if you take insurance, like the first place I worked was insurance based, it's still a barrier to access the care. If someone has a $60 copay, sometimes they just can't come, maybe more than that first visit. So I had started to reach out, and this is kind of where I think my current trajectory started to take off, was with media. I just started to reach out to like local papers, and if I saw stuff online, like I had Google alerts, and I had Google alerts for like incontinence and like vaginismus and vulvodynia, and I would get like a Google alert. Like I swear it was like once every 2 weeks that would pop up. Okay.
Right,
Now I feel like I get like a dozen a day or more. But I would set Google alerts for those. And then I would reach out to those writers that wrote the articles on those pelvic health conditions and just say, hey, this is what I do. This is how we can help. If you do a future story, I think it would be really valuable to include pelvic health physical therapy or women's health physical therapy at the time. And this is where I just started to get connections with media and really also started to become more of an advocate for all women to be able to access information to care. And yeah, just over time started to get more media. And then when your name starts getting placed in media, then you start getting everybody reaching out to you directly and reaching out to your practice. So I would have people send me these emails that were so detailed about their problems, and they lived all over the world. And I couldn't really provide meaningful care via email.
Sure.
And, I guess like I could have Skyped people, but it wasn't feeling like I could provide a meaningful program in that way at that time. So then that was led to me starting to write my book and then do more media, and all kind of snowballed from there.
Well, that's great. And so you began to kind of, with the stories that you were hearing from people all over the world, was there a lot of questions, particularly about sex, or was it that you kind of talked about everything, incontinence, vaginismus, but they felt like they had nowhere else they could ask these, more intimate questions?
Yeah, the emails were definitely more sex focused and painful sex focused, because at that time, so around this time, we're talking like mid 2000s, like maybe 2005, 6, 7, somewhere around there. There were no resources, zero. There were no, I don't even think YouTube was around. I don't know when that came out. Like there were no videos, there were no books, there was nothing for people. And I didn't start writing my book until 2012. The first edition came out in 2014. But there were no resources, and that's why I decided to write the book. Yeah, for incontinence, yes, there were options. People could have surgery. A lot of doctors knew about physical therapy. They weren't utilizing it in the best way. But for painful sex, this is why people in Germany and China and Mexico, this is why people were emailing me, because I put my email address at the time in those articles, so people had a direct line to me to be able to ask their questions.
Well, I love that. And I think it's so important that we put this into context, because that's absolutely right. Because I was doing the same kinds of things, not directly related to painful sex in every case, but educating on women's health in 2006, 2010, 2012. I do think people don't understand the large difference between access to any kind of information, education. We didn't have social media. I didn't even have an iPhone until probably 2000, I don't know, 12 at the earliest, maybe 2015. I remember filming YouTube videos like in a back porch with a camera. We didn't have phones and we didn't know how to produce anything. Like it was very, very different to be able to reach the kind of audience that we have now. And like you said, it was very stigmatized for women. And I think it still is in a lot of ways. And in some ways, I worry we're actually swinging to it being more stigmatized again than it even maybe was in the last 5 years. Yeah. So the idea of women having like sexual health freedom freedom to discuss it, freedom to get their questions answered. That's a really, really new thing in the last decade and a half.
Yeah, I agree. And there was definitely a huge increase, I think, after the Me Too movement. Women felt a lot more empowered to talk about their own bodies and the problems with it, as they should. So I feel like there was a big trajectory up with with women's empowerment and feeling like the advocacy efforts that me and other people have done were starting to, really show through, and people gaining access to that information and doing something with it. And then I think COVID also was another sort of bump up in the need for pelvic health services, because so much of what we do, at least in my practice, is chronic pain and chronic pelvic pain, and that just interplay between our nervous system and how we perceive pain was so heightened during that time. So we've had a couple of, major news slash world events that have sort of contributed to the rise of pelvic health.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that in the context of pelvic and sexual pain not being, for those of you watching on video, not being just a pelvic, pelvic floor. Like it's not just about these couple of muscles. You really have to think about the nervous system, the immune system, the integration between those, the musculoskeletal system of the whole body. So talk about how your practice has evolved in the last, since you wrote the first edition of the book, to be thinking about pelvic and sexual pain in context of all of that stress, anxiety. It's not in isolation.
Yeah, and that would be sort of another evolution of like my practice, right? Like starting out in sports and ortho, and then doing pelvic health. I definitely very much swung to like just focusing on the holes of the pelvis for a long time, until I realized there's a whole body attached to it that is driving these dysfunctions, whether it be incontinence or pelvic pain or sexual pain and dysfunction. So by the time I wrote my book, I was already well into incorporating the total body into care. And my first edition has already like some total body exercises that address both sort of like breath work and progressive relaxation and just mobility exercises. Mm-hmm. So my own evolution just is in continuing to advocate for total body care for patients, and to not just get lost in the pelvis, and to always keep the ortho skills up. You said you have a lot of like professional listeners and physical therapists, physiotherapists. So it's just always remembering that big picture and not just doing yoga or Pilates, like actually assessing what's going on, like at the vertebral level, like any dysfunctions that might be present, not just making it like a gross program for addressing the total body, like being really specific, really individualized, like we would. If someone had back pain, we don't just put everybody on a reformer and do Pilates. Like that may or may not help them. Like, why are they having back pain? And, most of my patients with sexual dysfunction do not just have sexual dysfunction. They might have hip impingement. What are you going to do for their hip impingement? Like there's a direct connection of the obturator to the levator ani muscle group, right? Like that's going to drive tension in the system. You have to treat their hip pain at the same time as you treat their sexual pain. Low back pain too, also very common. I'd say those are the two most common concurrent conditions that I see. So the evolution is just keeping your ortho skills and making it a more holistic care program.
And I think that's really interesting in the context of how the field has evolved. You and I are roughly the same age. So when we started in pelvic rehab, you pretty much had to have an orthopedic background and experience to be able to integrate pelvic rehab. But now in the last decade or so, you can kind of go directly to pelvic health. And so I think circling back and recognizing, and I also think that the research is a lot clearer on addressing chronic pain as a full systems issue, because also when we started, people with pelvic pain had very few options. Even, they had some people would send their patients to physical therapy, but by and large, our clients were challenged by things like opioid addiction. It was not really looked at as a systemic neuromusculoskeletal issue to address. So now I would imagine that with the book, with your media experience, with your private practice, you're still well known as an expert in painful sex. Are you still getting those emails, or maybe they're now social media messages? What are the big challenges in the marketplace right now?
As far as getting the same emails, no, because I think those might be buried enough with all the other stuff I've done that it's a lot harder to find my direct email.
Okay.
So they come in the form of contact form inquiries to my practice, which thankfully, I kind of screen, but I'm not responding to the majority of those. And it's majority are people that live locally and want to schedule locally. The whole telehealth challenge is definitely there, and we had a huge spike, like most practices did, in telehealth inquiries, but we just don't do that outside of California, so it just was really limiting for our practice, even though we would get inquiries from all over.
And what are they asking? Like, what are the questions right now? What are people still struggling with, despite the fact that we have a lot more information just more publicly available?
I think what they're struggling with is access to the hands-on care, because many, like in Los Angeles, probably majority of pelvic health practices are out of network. So there's definitely that piece. We have my book. It's in our signature. We recommend that if people are unable to schedule due to cost. So I feel like we're able to provide them resources to help support them, but we're not getting as much the specific questions. Like we're getting a little bit of the history, like, I every once in a while also get the emails like, I'm on my honeymoon, I live in Los Angeles, my husband and I can't have sex. When's your first appointment?
Mm-hmm.
Like those types of emails come in that are very frantic. But for the most part, it's a lot of like chronic pain, and people are just sort of seeking the in-office care.
So our biggest challenge right now is really more accessibility, which is helped by, access to your book, access to more education, but still the accessibility directly to providers is a challenge. And I don't think there are any simple ways to solve that problem, but if you have any thoughts, you're welcome to share.
I mean, that's what I've tried to do through my book, and I started a nonprofit to try to help support getting folks one-on-one in office care, as well. So offering financial support, we offer a sliding scale. Like we try all sorts of different things to help support patients getting in the door. Yeah, it's a systemic problem. Like, I don't know how it is in other states, but California health insurers don't pay much for physical therapists, and they certainly don't pay much more for one-on-one that's required in pelvic PT. So, we know the codes are the codes, and an angle sprain gets reimbursed the same as someone with 20 years of chronic abdominal and pelvic pain. So one person needs 6 visits, one person might need 30 visits. They're going to be limited in visit number, but also in reimbursement per session. And our population, we can't do group therapy. So it comes at a much higher level. And everybody now knows, even more so intimately, the problems with the insurance industry with more recent events. So
absolutely. I mean, these are major systemic problems in healthcare, but I do think that providing more access to this education through your book, through the media, even work that you've done, just to bring awareness that first, number one, people have to have awareness that there's something that can be done. Number two, kind of what those solutions look like, which the book can really map out. And number three is then helping them actually access the more direct care or some of the telehealth options, which aren't always a complete solution, but at least start people down the path when they don't have such easy access in a system that, individual practitioners have very little ability to change. But even, creating that nonprofit and creating more economic access, I think every little thing that we do really adds to that accessibility. So I appreciate what you're doing there.
Mm-hmm. And I really value community education. So, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of blog articles on our Femina PT website. And, it's I don't know if I'd say 700. We have so much free education. Lots of the articles have exercises with them. So, if people are detective enough, they just go into our search bar and they could search low back pain or postpartum back pain, or whatever. They'll get information that they can use without having to come in and see us. So there's a lot of information out there that we have for them to better support their needs.
Really, really good. So let's talk about the second edition of the book. What spurred you on to write it? Because for those of us who have ever written a book, it's like one of those things where you write it and you're like, that was terrible. Then I'm never doing it again. And then you forget and you do it again.
I know. And it is part of the struggle. It's I just got out there and never have to do it again. That was definitely how I felt. But then 10 years pass. And one thing my first edition did not have was specific tools to help with deep dyspnea and bladder pain, because I just felt this is already such a big topic we're tackling. And I really wanted to keep my book under 100 pages. I wanted it to be more like a workbook almost, not this I have this pain, let me sit down and read 400 pages about how to fix it. I wanted it to feel really approachable. And so, pack in what I could. And it, I think the first edition was 94 pages or something. But a lot of it's images. So it's not that heavy text reading. And I had an image drawn using a pelvic wand for the first edition, but I decided not to put it in because I was I think it's already hard enough with straight dilators to figure out what's going on in there. Let me literally not throw curves at them by having a curved wand exercise set. So the second edition, I added that and focusing more on deep dyspnea and exercises using a wand that they can do to help with those symptoms and helping with bladder pain and urinary urgency frequency. So just because, as I explained in the book, those conditions happen together so much that, people don't always have just painful sex. They have painful sex and possible endo, painful sex and pee 20 times a day. Our systems are so connected down there that I wanted to make the program truly more comprehensive. I treat people every day. I don't just focus only on their sexual pain. So that added piece was what, and a couple of feedback from people on Amazon that it doesn't help deeper pain, but they could have just applied those same techniques to a deeper area, but you have to be more explicit, for a lot of people. So I wanted to have that further instruction to better support everyone.
That's wonderful. So what do you hope out of this release of the new book? And what's next for you, having such a really interesting career up to now?
Yeah. I've been trying to think, how do I want to spend all my quote unquote free time?
Now you're not writing every minute. Yeah.
And the Academy of Pelvic Health presidency that I did for, the 3-year term, basically, between the two different roles I had there, was very time consuming. Once this book is done, I'm just how do I want to spend that free time? Well, I'll probably continue to advocate. I'll get back in my local community. I used to do an event pre-COVID that I loved. I did it 3 years in a row, 2017, 18, 19, where I would host host events in different sort of like centers, like a bar or something. I'd rent it out fully and do pelvic health education. I called it Girls Night Out, Girls Night Out, Better Sexual and Pelvic Health. And so I want to revamp that hopefully this fall and get more of that like fun community education. It was just part of my mission, like just be more in my like local community again, because I've really missed that connection through not just COVID, but just having other time commitments that pulled me away. I'm hoping my book will just continue its reach and do as well or better than the first book did. And get that translated into more languages. It'll just be coming out in English initially. So that'll be a little project, and maybe get some traveling done.
Nice. Love that. So the book comes out in March is the tentative date, 2025, for the updated and fully revised and new sections addressing pain that is more common for women with endometriosis, women with painful bladder syndrome, and other of these deeper sexual pain related to comorbidities and just deep pelvic floor dysfunction. So I think that addition, people are really ready for it because they're understanding more and more what the pelvic floor is, that there are different layers, that you can have different kinds of sexual pain. So I think just being that voice of painful sex exists for women and can and does have treatments, it was like step one. And now it's like, well, there are various kinds of painful sex and different circumstances that often come with other comorbidities. So let's advance our conversation now that women have been introduced to the conversation. So in March 2025 and beyond, get the updated edition of Pain with Sex by Dr. Heather Jeffcoat. And where can people find you if they either want to work with you directly as a client or learn more about your local events?
Yeah, so it's actually called Sex Without Pain because
we don't want
to. So we don't have. Well, you don't want people to have pain with sex,
right? Pain, sex without pain. I know. I had this like visual of the title, and I still said it wrong.
But it's funny you say that because when I did my book trailer for the first book, I literally said that. Like I said, like have sex with pain, and I was like, no, wait, that's what I'm trying to have people avoid.
Sex without pain. Sex without pain. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. Sex Without Pain, a self-treatment guide to the sex life you deserve, out in March, just in time for Endometriosis Awareness Month 2. They can also find me on my websites. I have a female-focused website called Femina Physical Therapy. That's at feminapt.com. But I also understand the value of inclusiveness. We treat men, we treat kids with pelvic health conditions. So that's on my original brand, fusionwellnesspt.com. You can find us at the matching handles to the URL. And we're just really behind the time, but we're just starting to drop some videos on the YouTube channels as well, which have the same, you can find us there by looking up our names. And just mission to get more education out to folks at all different price points and free. And that's going to be the mission going forward.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing this with us and, inspiring the professionals in our community with your career journey and your mission that continues, and then offering these resources for women who are really struggling. So, and, people of other genders as well who are really struggling with sexual pain. While obviously the conversation has expanded, it's still a taboo topic in many areas. And so having resources that are safe and legitimate and evidence-based is really important. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Jessica.